Now, the Portfolio Committee on Mineral Resources and Energy will return to Jagersfontein today. This is the committee's second visit after a mine dam wall collapsed there last week. Now, the incident left at least one person dead and over 300 others homeless. Kicking off their visit yesterday, they received briefings from the Free State Disaster Management Center, the police and the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. Today, they will assess the damage caused by the mudslide and the flooding. They are also expected to visit the mine that is at the center of the tragedy. Residents of the Free State community are suing the owners of the diamond mine. Now, experts have warned that urgent intervention is needed in Jagersfontein after the mine dam burst. Raw sewage flowing downstream is approaching the Kalkfontein Dam, a water source for a number of towns in that area. They believe that government is failing communities living downstream from dams countrywide, most of which are not properly monitored. For more on this, we are now joined by Mariette Liefferink from the Federation for a Sustainable Environment. Mariette, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Now, tailing dams, which are slime dams, they stored residue of mining operations, and they often contain radioactive and toxic material. What is the responsibility of these mining companies when it comes to tailing dams?
In terms of Section 28 of the National Environmental Management Act, mining companies must have a duty of care, exercise a duty of care to prevent pollution. If pollution cannot be prevented, then it must be mitigated or managed. Reasonable measures must be put in place. I just thought that perhaps it would be of interest to the viewers and the listeners to take note of what academic research, the statistics that have been provided. It mentions that there is no comprehensive global registry of tailing storage facilities that is now globally, but it is estimated that there are around 18,000 dams, 3,500 of which are active. In South Africa, it is estimated that there are 400 tailings dams in South Africa, of which plus minus 200 are active. In the gold mining sector, there's 270 tailing storage facilities and 380 radioactive mine residue areas. Of interest is perhaps also to compare the volumes of minerals or metals that are extracted, and then to compare it with the waste that is created. To exemplify, within the gold mining industry, for the last 420 or more years, 43,500 tons of gold were extracted, but it left a legacy of 6 billion tons of iron pyrite tailings, that is waste, as well as 600,000 tons of uranium. With regards to the waste from the diamond activities, the diamond activities may not contain radioactive material, and we were informed by Jagersfontein Development that the tailings are not toxic. However, there has been no scientific evidence adduced or produced in order for us to consider this as low risk. A risk assessment has to be conducted, and the precautionary principle or risk-averse principle ought to apply. If I may also mention that the waste in mining is classified as the second greatest environmental risk next to global warming because of the profound, often irreversible impacts on ecosystems. So it is not just the impacts on human health, it's the impacts also on ecosystems, and in the case under consideration, the impacts also on the integrated Vaal River system, because the waste, that is the tailings from the Jagersfontein tailings storage facilities, also impacted on downstream water resources as well as on cattle. I have gained some expert advice from a mining engineer as well as a veterinarian, and I was told that apparently the tailings of of the Jagersfontein tailing storage facilities contain very fine particulate matter, and that causes blockages in cattle, and that results in death.
Sure, these are quite alarming numbers, Mariette, but we do know that the long-term management of these tailing facilities is the responsibility of the mining companies that produce them and is subject to South Africa's environmental legislation. But is that legislation being implemented?
You have, in your introduction, referred to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee who had visited the Jagersfontein disaster area. I now wish to respectfully submit that the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee in 2018 had also visited the Shiva mine. It was a Gupta uranium mine. It also visited the Mintaus group of companies, and they found that, for example, the Mintaus group had operated between 2012 and 2018 without an approved environmental management program report and without a mining right, and that they did not top up their rehabilitation funds. So when three of the group of the subsidiaries liquidated, they had an unfunded environmental liability of 460 million rand. They left in their wake, as the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee found in 2018, clusters of open pits where children drown, unrehabilitated footprints of reclaimed tailing storage facilities, partially reclaimed tailing storage facilities with no mitigation or management measures, and toxic and radioactive dams. The Parliamentary Portfolio Committee then made certain recommendations that was also presented in a report to the National Assembly in 2018. To date, there had been no implementation of the findings or the recommendations. So visits by parliamentary portfolio committees or visits by ministers are in vain if the recommendations and the findings are not implemented. Furthermore, our laws, our regulations exist in vain if there is no enforcement of non-compliance and prosecution of big polluters.
So how can then communities hold government accountable for them to be able to hold these mining companies accountable?
First of all, the law makes provision, that is the National Environmental Management Act, to whistleblow. First of all, what I'm currently doing is to whistleblow to the news media. So whistleblowing is protected if the whistleblowing is to notify, for example, parliamentary portfolio committees, as well as the public protector, the South African Human Rights Commission, and any organ of state that whose ambit or whose purview relates to the environmental legislation. So if a person whistleblows in good faith regarding a risk or an incident, an environmental incident, such a person, a whistleblower, cannot be prosecuted, cannot be prejudiced against, cannot be discriminated against in terms of Section 31 of the NEMA. Besides that, there is also the provision in Section 32 of the NEMA, the National Environmental Management Act, to, for example, lay criminal charges on behalf of the public, on behalf of a group, on behalf of the environment, if there is failure in duty of care, pollution, or ecological degradation. The law also makes provision for private prosecution, as well as I've mentioned, laying criminal charges and public prosecution. Besides the fact that directors individually and collectively can be held accountable and liable, companies can be held accountable, organs of state, director generals, ministers, as well as any other officials who failed to exercise their fiduciary duties or their duties as organs of state, can also be held liable or responsible in court action.
Now, Mariette, you mentioned a little earlier on that the Witwatersrand Basin has more than 270 tailings that have been identified. How dire is the situation, and how much danger are we in if we still have so many, 400, like you mentioned earlier on, across the country, of these tailing dams?
We must remember that tailings dams must be engineered. It also are living structures. The construction may be relatively easy, but because in South Africa we construct our tailings upstream, it's referred to as upstream tailings storage facilities. It's the lowest cost, but the highest risk of failure. It requires highly specialized technology. It also has an inherent high hazard. So it requires in-depth understanding and continual management within an appropriate tailings management system. I also thought that I'll just refer this to you because in South Africa there is the tendency now to remine tailings storage facilities and deposit the residue in a centralized or tailings storage facility or a super dump. While my organization are not opposed to the reprocessing of existing tailings storage facilities that have been poorly constructed and in close proximity to communities, what is sobering, however, is the risk of these super dumps if not managed responsibly. And here I just wish to refer to research that was done by Earthworks, and I'm reading. It says that the research of all serious tailings failures since 1915 shows the rate of serious tailings dam failures is increasing. Half, that is 33 of 67 of serious tailings dam failures in the last 70 years occurred in the 20 years between 1990 and 2009. And this is the important part. The increasing rate of tailings dam failures is propelled by, not in spite of, modern mining practices. The increasing rate of tailings dam failures is directly related to the increasing number of tailings storage facilities larger than 5 million cubic meter capacity necessitated to allow the economic extraction of lower grades of ore. So I think it is a sobering and wake-up call to the public, to our organs of state, to our regulators, as well as to the mining companies, to ensure that there is stringent management measures in place. If there is non-compliance, that is enforced with diligence and with political will.
All right.
And besides the
Apologies,
Yes.
Mariette. I'm sorry. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. This is a very important discussion around tailing dams, but we do really appreciate your input and your insights around this topic.